Thanks, everyone. Well, welcome. So tonight, we wanted to talk about the Corte Madera sales tax, Measure F. And tonight, we are not advocating for this tax. We are basically laying the foundation and telling you the story of our current sales tax measure, what we're trying to do with this tax measure, and really planning for the future. I think when you think about government, one of the things that is most important is that you plan for the future. And really, we try to take a long view outlook of our community, the challenges that we face, what we need to do to meet those needs, and what are the opportunities available to us today, the tools in our toolbox, to really set future generations up for success. We don't know what the future 20, 30, 40, 50 years holds for us, but we can only do the best we can. And as we tell the story of what your town has been up to the past year, this is really, it points us back to a funding mechanism that allows us that opportunity to really strengthen, fortify our infrastructure over the next few decades. And so we're excited to share that with you. So tonight, what we plan on doing, a quick meeting overview. The purpose of our meeting is to provide background, transparency, and information on the current and future sales tax measures. Currently, Measure B, it was approved by the voters in 2013 and took effect in 2014. It's a 6-year sales tax measure, and we're going to talk about how that came about. We're also going to talk about the role and findings of the Citizens Oversight Committee. This is an important mechanism and group within our sales tax measure plan and oversight. The next thing, we're going to talk about Measure F. And so that, again, it is going on this ballot measure on June 5th of 2018. And we're going to talk about the ballot language and the purpose, and really, why are we doing that? And it's for fiscal stability and infrastructure. And lastly, Peter is going to really dive into, give you a snapshot of really our infrastructure needs from a flood control, disaster preparedness, transportation standpoint, and street safety and repairs over the next 2 years, and then give you a snapshot through 2030 of really what we're facing. And when you talk about those needs, we're talking about $50 million worth of infrastructure needs. So real quick, a little background about the sales tax measure. And so we're going to talk about sales tax measure B. It was a half-cent sales tax measure in 2013. Again, the council in 2013 placed that sales tax measure on the ballot. And at the time, it was a different time in 2013 than it is today. At the time, we were going through the worst economic downturn that this town has ever faced in the last 40 years. It was a $2.5 million hit to our budget over a 5-year span. And really, when they looked at this, and we have council members that lived through this that are in the room today and can speak to it, they really looked at a funding mechanism to maintain our reserves and to maintain services and infrastructure. And so on November 5th of 2013, that ballot measure went to the voters and it was approved. It was a half-cent ballot measure, again, known as Measure B, and it was approved by 68% of our voters. This was a 50% plus one vote, and it was approved by 68% of our voters. It was a pretty strong statement by our community at the time. Again, it took effect on April 1st of 2014. This measure expires April 1st of 2020, and as we go through this conversation, it'll be like, well, why are we not waiting till 2020? Why are we talking about rescinding a property tax? Why are we not waiting until that is up in 2023? And so it's a little bit complicated of how we came to this, and that's why this forum is so important, to really kind of outline what our thinking is and what we're trying to do, and then really open it up to you as a community to ask us those questions to make sure we all understand and agree on where we're headed. The last bullet point's really important. So the expenditures are reviewed annually by our Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. The committee reports are, again, it's an annual report. It is provided to our council on an annual basis, and it is located on our website, and that is the link. And really the mission of the Oversight Committee in 2013 was to review our expenditures to make sure that we are spending them as we promised the voters. Again, this is an unrestricted tax. This sales tax can be spent on anything. It can. But our council felt strongly and the community agreed in 2013 that we should outline what we are going to use these funds for, and these funds should then be reviewed and reported back by the Oversight Committee. And again, just to touch base on what those key points were back in 2013, they were to be used for firefighting and fire prevention, streets and potholes, disaster preparedness, flood control, safe routes to schools, and senior and youth programs. Those were the key items that were outlined in 2013, and again, the Oversight Committee reviews those on an annual basis, and I'll tell you to date, that's exactly how the town has spent that funding. So some continued existing sales tax measure facts. When you look at our taxing mechanisms, right, we have property taxes that immediately hit our commercial and residential residents. This tax is interesting, so it's unique, and what it does is it shares that with regional shopping, with regional shoppers that come to our community. Our regional shopping centers and auto dealerships provide the economic engine that make our sales tax revenue go in Corte Madera. If you look at, and we'll talk about in a second, if you look at what we generate in sales tax revenue, and you compare us in the state of California, we're in the top 3 per capita of what we generate, the revenue we generate per capita. If you look at us in the state in the United States, we're in the top 1, 2, 3% in the United States of what we generate per capita in sales tax. It's the engine that makes us go. Now compare us to property tax. Property tax in our community, we do really well. If you compare us to Sonoma County, East Bay, other counties, Corte Madera does well. But if you compare us to our cohorts within the county, we're not as strong as the Mill Valley, as Larkspur, as San Anselmo. As a reference point, we bring in about $6.2 million annually in revolving revenue for property taxes, compared to $9 million annually in sales tax revenue. So sales tax revenue, and we'll talk about on the next slide, that's our 1% that we receive in normal sales tax revenue, as well as our 0.5% that we receive in our sales tax measure. It totals $9 million. Shoppers from all over Marin and Sonoma counties come for the unique experience of our shopping centers. Our 2 shopping centers, Town Center and the Village Shopping Center, generate about $4.2 million annually in sales tax revenue. Something else on Measure B, our current sales tax measure. This isn't a new tax. Measure B runs between 2014 and 2020. And what we're recommending is that this sales tax measure is replaced and continued by Measure F, and we'll talk about that in a second. Measure B provides about 12% of our town revenue, our reoccurring revenue. So our reoccurring revenue, there's a number of sources: property tax, sales tax, transient occupancy taxes, permits, fines, fees. That number is about $18.3 million annually. Measure B generates about 2.5 annually for a total of about $20 million plus a year. And so if you take that number and you compare it to what the revenue is generated from Measure B, it's about 12% of our town's revenue. So it's a really important number to consider as we move forward. Corte Madera leads the county in per capita sales tax revenue. And this is one, and I might ask our finance director to jump in here if I misstate anything, but if you basically look at us and you compare Corte Madera to everyone else in the county, you start off of, again, what is our sales tax measure? And so you can see in the second column, we're 1/2 cent currently, and then you can compare what the other cities have or not have in sales tax measures. San Rafael's 0.75, and you can go down. If you compare that and you move over to the next slide, that is our total sales tax for our city, for our town. It's 8.750. The next line, you have our population. We're just under 9,500 people. Our current sales tax revenues for the fiscal year 16-17 was just about at $6.5 million, as I said earlier. Measure B generated about $2.5 million for a total of just right at about $9 million annually. And so if you compare that to what the revenue is generated per resident, this isn't what each resident pays. This is just a comparison of If you looked at revenue compared to what we have in our population, we're at the top in the county. It just shows you our opportunity, our earning potential. Daria, anything else you wanted to add with that? Okay. Again, move into just conversations we've had with our oversight committee. So the charge in writing in the current ordinance is that our oversight committee is to review all of our expenditures on an annual basis and report out if we've spent them the way we said we would within those 5 bullet points I said earlier. But something that this oversight committee has really turned into, it's turned into kind of a sounding board, an advisory board to provide just input to staff on what we're doing well, what we can do better, how we should really look at the funds we generate and how we use them. And so the next 2 slides will talk about a number of conversations that we've had with the Oversight Committee. The first one was, again, just spelling out, well, what is it? So again, in Corte Madera, the sales tax rate is 8.75%. The town receives about 1% of that. They do receive 1%, and it's about $6.5 million annually. The half a cent sales tax measure, Measure B, generates about $2.5 million. And there's also a handout in the back. Councilmember Andrews provides an overlay of like where all the money goes. And so within the county, so the 8.75%, it'll show you where the money goes. But again, California receives about 6.25% of that. And again, the county measures also total about 1%, bringing us to our 8.75% number. This is important because the half a cent Measure B, it's a direct allocation to the town. We fully control, it's fully locally controlled by the town. And so the state can't come back as in previous years and touch this money. This is our money. It goes strictly to the town of Corte Madera, and no other governmental agency can touch that revenue stream, and that's important. The Oversight Committee has really, they've asked a lot of questions. They've really urged and pushed the staff in our council to make sure that we're spending monies on senior and youth programs and disaster preparedness. It's a big one, and we'll talk about it in the next slide. They have really, they want a long-term plan of what we're doing to improve our senior and youth programs and disaster preparedness, and they've really urged us to focus on that. And the other thing, and it's not only the Oversight Committee, I think it's a fair criticism of the town. There's a lot of reasons for it, and we're not here to talk about excuses, it's just a fact. And there's been an expressed interest and concern about accelerating our capital project delivery. An example is in our last, this current fiscal year, we have 31 plus capital improvement projects. It totals $11 million. Well, we're not going to get those all done, right? We're going to get 10% of those done. And so it's a fair criticism. They have to get done. We have the funding to do it. Do we have the bandwidth to get those done in a reasonable time? And so it goes to process, it goes to planning, it goes to staffing, and that is the criticism that we've had, and what you'll hear tonight is we are putting things in place to speak to those future challenges. And again, I think as all the state and federal resources, they're decreasing over time. There's been 146 newly approved sales tax measures that have been approved by California cities since 2013. This is a mechanism, one of the last mechanisms for cities to really speak to maintaining their infrastructure. One of the other things is currently a lot of questions have been asked about, well, what are we doing about disaster preparedness? And so currently, we have set aside $1.7 million for unforeseen events like Sonoma, Napa, the fires that have devastated our friends to the north. But if anything happens, we're susceptible to flooding, earthquakes, fire. If that happens, a portion of our town is going to be shut down, and we have to have the revenue stream to continue to ensure that our operations continue to protect our citizens. And so we have $1.7 million set aside currently for those events. We also have budgeted $100,000 for brush removal, creating defensible space in our community. We're in the process of developing evacuation routes and emergency response plans for all types of disasters. We're going to start on our hillsides and then work our way around town. We have a full-time fire marshal. He was hired last year to increase our fire prevention and enforce local ordinances. Our neighborhood response group coordinator was hired last year. We currently support 2,000 of our 4,000 households in Corte Madera. We budget $20,000 annually for that, and another $30,000 in support for those neighborhoods in training and equipment. And we're currently evaluating the implementation of an early warning alert system as a redundancy to the county plan. So when we talk about that, that's what we're doing now. So as your town manager, when I look at a revenue stream, I look at a budget and I say, okay, when I know I bring in 18.3 million annually in revolving revenue, what is my revolving expenditures? About 16.5 of that is on personnel, right? And then what else do we have within that? So what do I need to maintain that expenditure, a program? If I'm going to do something, I want to maintain it in the good times and bad. And so this is our response to that, knowing that I have a sales tax measure for 6 years. I have to be careful how I budget for that on an annual basis. We're going to talk about Measure F in a second, but if I know that I have these revenue streams for a longer period of time, we're going to talk about capital improvements, and that's really what Measure F is about. But it's also about services. It's about these areas here in disaster preparedness, because it also protects that. So when you know you have that, what we would do, as an example, bullet point 1, the 1.7 million, it would go up to 2.5. We would completely change our strategy on defensible space, and so we would actually triple that $100,000 annual budget number. It would go to 300,000, and something we would do is we would first start with all of the local owned properties, and we would ensure that with that funding that we provide defensible space on all town-owned property. Next, what we would do is we would support our community in educating them and explaining what their requirements are. We're not asking, it's a requirement. You have to create defensible space. And if you don't, then here's the mechanism that gives us funding to create that defensible space for them. And then they are ultimately responsible for that charge. And so it's a policy issue, but it's also an economic issue for us. And so this sales tax measure would allow us to do that. The other thing that's really important, it follows the Mill Valley model. We've talked a lot about it, is that improving our steps, our pathways, our routes in our community, and improving it in our signage. And so then improving those, creating the defensible space, and then educating our community where those are. That's a big issue, and that's coming forward as we move forward. The fire marshal position's important, but he needs help. He can't do it all himself. And so we spend $50,000 annually on a code enforcement officer, and what we would do is we'd probably up that to about $250,000 annually to support our fire prevention efforts, because that's what it's going to take. The neighborhood response groups, very successful. We're going to continue to do that. In the early warning system, alert system, we're looking at technology of a siren. Whatever we do, we just need to make sure that we do it in concert with Mill Valley and Larkspur, because we really are united on that hillside. But it's just as an example of currently how we're operating and what a sales tax measure F could provide us. In closing, on my part, and I'm going to turn it over because it's really about infrastructure tonight, this is in the back of the room, and again, all these forms, we're videotaping this forum. All of our documents tonight will be on the website as well. But I just wanted, does everyone have this? This is the ballot language. Okay. So I'm going to read it since we're videotaping this, but a couple things with the ballot language. So again, our ballot language for this ballot states the following. Shall Corte Madera 1 eliminate the special drainage property tax? It's $98 per residential unit or per 1,000 square feet, or per 1,000 commercial square feet. And 2, extend the existing half-cent sales tax to a three-quarter cent rate until ended by the voters. This will provide us approximately $3.5 million annually for unrestricted general revenue purposes. For example, flood, sea level rise, disaster preparedness, fire prevention, street repair, improved traffic flow, safety improvements, 911 response, and senior and youth programs. This is subject to annual audits and the Citizens Oversight Committee. So we're doing a lot of things. I'm going to turn it over to Peter in a second, and I just really commend the council and their thoughtfulness about this, and staff are really evaluating opportunities for us. But when we step back and we say, okay, when I talk about revolving revenue, and we bring in $18.3 million annually, and we pay in expenditures 17.7 annually, how much money is left for infrastructure? To protect and fortify our town, our flood control system since 1982, we put $20 to $30 million into that. You know, when you look at capital improvements and infrastructure projects, and these are conservative numbers, these are conservative projects. We're not playing with numbers, and you'll see it. These are things that we have to do. We know we have to do with today's dollars. It's over $50 million between now and 2030. The operating budget cannot pay for that. The only opportunity when you look at us in Corte Madera with our earning potential is this tax measure that could provide a big portion of that and a plan for the future. You know, and it provides multiple options for future councils, for future staff, and our residents when we get to that point in the future. And something else that's really important and unique, we stepped back and we said, okay, if we have that, is it a half a cent or 3/4 cent? What do we need? And it was 3/4 cent. And then we said, okay, let's look at all of our taxes. When we look at what we're trying to do infrastructure-wise, what makes sense? Should just be a shared cost of our residents, our commercial businesses, right? And the shoppers that come into our town and enjoy the amenities that we provide them and the support that we have to protect them from a flood control standpoint. We thought it was appropriate because a major portion of these revenues by sales tax are provided by outside of our community. And then we took it another step and we said, okay, what does this accomplish? This $3.5 million annually. Measure B was 2.5. This increases it to about 3.5 to 3.7 annually. So we generated $1 million to $1.2 million additional revenue annually. What are some things that we're trying to accomplish? Flood control, flood maintenance. We're trying to protect our infrastructure that we built from 1982 to now and moving forward. We're not even talking about sea level rise yet, folks. We're talking about just our infrastructure. The sales tax mechanism that we're talking about speaks to that. And then we looked at our flood tax, right? Because we have a $98 parcel tax paid by our residents and our commercial businesses until 2023. And as staff and the council, when we had this conversation, we said, look, we have the solution. We think we have the solution. It's this sales tax measure. It's appropriate to give back this other tax to our community now. Let's not wait till 2023. And as government, it's hard to give back money. But I compliment the council that they considered it and they approved it, that it's important to give it back. And we're giving back that funding because it's the right thing. Because this sales tax measure speaks to that. And it actually improves our maintenance plan. And Peter's going to jump into it right now and go over the infrastructure. So thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, members of the public and the audience, for your attention. And I think before we go on, it might be just appropriate, since this is about Measure F and this is a Measure F forum, does anyone have any questions about the ballot, the language, the words? I'm seeing no hands come up, which is good. Oh, there's one. Okay. Let's get you on that. Try that again with the mic.
Let's see, how did I start? Since it's going into the general fund, and I know you have an oversight committee, is this to say that it will only go to what is listed now, that won't be amended within this time frame that this tax is in effect?
That's a good question. So the main difference between that is what we call a special use tax versus a general purpose tax. So the short answer to your question is it can be used for anything, including what's on that list and anything else beyond that that the council deems reasonable. So a general purpose tax that requires 50% plus one vote is eligible for any general fund use. A special tax, like say the Transportation Authority of Marin, that is a transportation tax that is only to be used for transportation purposes. That has to have 2/3 of a vote. The nuance here is that in this particular case, the council has made the policy decision to focus on these particular things, and they've assigned the Citizens Oversight Committee to review and report on how the funds are used. So does that make sense?
That's this council. So any future council will be also, let's see, they will have to agree that these are the only things that it can be, that tax money can be used for? Because you still have in there, well, it's used for these, but it could also be used for others if the council would deem that appropriate. Well, when councils get pushed to the wall and they need money for something else, it's very easy for them to say, we've got this money here, we can dip into that, use that for something that we do deem to be necessary now.
Understood. I'll give my answer. It looks like Councilmember Andrews and Todd might want to chime in on this as well. So the answer that I would give, and the reason why we put up the 12% of total revenue, is that this tax really is designed by this council and future councils to be used for the purposes that are listed there. It's 12% of our total revenue. So all the other things that the town would do would conceivably come out of that other 88%. That number could change. It could be 80, it could be 90, it could be 95. Right now, the number is 12 and 88. So in our opinion, for the next 10, 20, 30 years, this is the source for these purposes. But to be totally clear, the council has full discretion over how these funds are to be used, and they can be used for anything the council deems necessary. So there is flexibility there. Do you want to add anything to that, or is that clear enough, Todd?
It's a great question, Phyllis, and we're all taxpayers, right? And so we step back, and so what are we all thinking in the room? Well, you're doing this because you didn't do something right in the past, or this is going to go to pensions or whatever. And we do have an unfunded liability in Corte Madera. It's actually, you know, that's a single topic issue for our community, and so we're going to talk about it in an upcoming forum. But the town is actually putting a lot of steps in place to speak to those. And we actually have a 20-year plan in place today that actually goes farther than the pension reform folks have stepped in bullet-pointed items that we should think about as a town, doing more than our cohorts in the county and the Bay Area and in the state of California. It's an exciting, I guess I shouldn't say the word exciting because it's scary, but we have a plan, and I think as a taxpayer, that's all you can ask. What is your long-term plan, and how are you going to do it, and how we are going to speak to pensions, and we're going to set up future councils and staff in the community to make those tough decisions? It's to have the plan within our operating budget. So when I tell you we bring in $18.3 million annually, we have a plan to make our own future within that budget and to speak to those types of liabilities. And I went off script last time on Saturday. Half the room was here for that, so I won't do it. But I'm happy to talk to anyone offline. And really, it's a single topic option item for a forum. But you have to step back and go, what are our challenges? Unfunded liabilities are a big one. Staffing, service, everything we do. So how can we do that within our operating budget, what our town already pays taxes for? What is your long-term plan for that? And I'll tell you, we have one. We told the story at the budget. You're going to hear it again. You're going to hear it in forums. Now the next issue that we have is our infrastructure. And our infrastructure, as Peter's going to touch on, is greater than any community this size that I can think of. I am worried. We are all worried. And we're like, how are we going to solve that problem? And it's really, this measure is the mechanism for it. So can a council change things 10 years, 20 years from now? They could, and we want them to have that flexibility, but we also today want to solve their problems for them. And that's our job as stewards of our community, and so that's what we're doing. And so we're excited to share that. So that would be my response.
Okay, we'll take one or two more questions, and then I'm going to get to the capital infrastructure talk.
Phyllis, the current sales tax was also, if you look at the language, unrestricted general revenue purposes. So the answer to your question is these funds are unrestricted general revenue purposes. And with this kind of initiative, that's the way that it is. They are unrestricted general revenue purposes. And it is the intention of the current council, and is the intention of the oversight committee to put in oversight and to direct them being spent as the language suggests and as apparently the citizens wish. But at the end of the day, These are unrestricted general revenue funds.
Okay, there it is from the chair of the Citizens Oversight Committee. Okay, I'm going to try to get through this relatively quickly. I think for many people in the room, the next set of slides may have been seen before. I put this one in for our planning director. This is our general plan land use diagram. I think it's important to note the amount of marshland that we have, the amount of single-family residential properties that are nearby the coast. As well as here, even though they're inland and say on the west side of 101, we still have a full third of the community that is vulnerable to flood. And so flood control will be a theme that you hear over the next 5 or 10 minutes in terms of importance of investment. There's been an assessment both around the bay and specifically in Marin County for vulnerability. And so while Todd said we're not talking about sea level rise, I think that without addressing sea level rise, we have plenty of flood control systems to deal with and improve. But when we bring in the sea level rise issue, and we'll zoom in a little bit on Corte Madera, we'll see that our need is even greater. So this is 12 inches. So this is what the experts are telling us. Here I'm looking at 12 inches by 2030. So that's in 12 years. This is what we should be preparing for. That is 1 foot in 12 years. That's about an inch a year. I'm not very good at math, but that's how it comes out in my calculation. This is where we are right now. This is Town Park and Town Hall. So at 12 inches, much of the communities surrounding us, including neighboring Larkspur, are incredibly vulnerable to sea level rise. So this tells me that we have a significant infrastructure conundrum in front of us. And I also think we have the ability to make great strides with it if we have the proper funding in place. So I want to go into a few categories and talk about the relationship between the capital improvement programs and the sales tax revenue. So these are goals for the Public Works Department. I think safety is number one. I feel comfortable saying it. Safety is the number one thing that we do. I think fire might say the same thing. The police department might say the same thing. I think it's true for the traveling public and public works improvements. And of course, when you add diminishing flood impacts, that goes right along with the work that Public Works Department does. Having a stable long-term revenue stream for town improvements is critical. It's tough to do if we don't know what's going to be in place in 5 or 10 years. Measure F would give us that, I think, that long-term revenue source. Bullet 3 is important for me. So I think we need to do a good job to have the right staff in place to anticipate the maintenance needs. In other words, don't be caught off guard and wait for something to break down and need full replacement. But look ahead, regularly check, understand the condition of our infrastructure, maintain it, prolong its useful life. So everything that's a capital asset has a useful life. That is by average and of course on the ground. You assess it sometimes, say a building's useful life can be 50 years, but many buildings can last 100 years if they're maintained and refurbished. If you don't touch a building at all for 20 years, it might even just start falling down. So keeping things in useful life and useful condition is really important. And then this is the one that's really going to hit our capital budget and our town budget, is replacing things as needed. And some of you have heard me use this example before. Our newest pump station, so Todd talked about $20 million of investment since 1982. Our newest pump station was built in 1999. Pump stations tend to have that 20 to 30 years of useful life. So I happen to know that both on the sanitary district side and on the town flood control side, we're going to be replacing gates, automating systems, upgrading the flood control system, and that'll be critical to deal with a foot of sea level rise by 2030. I personally have this goal, and I think that I can get the council behind me on this, is to make the town of Corte Madera a model for how to fund and implement public works transportation improvements and flood control systems. I think that we already are there. I think we can take some great steps in the next 5 to 10 years to really have people around the Bay Area and around the state to look what Corte Madera is doing. And I think I would take a lot of pride if that began to happen. Using the red font now, I think the Measure F would increase, we've done the math, it would increase the revenue to meet town's current and future infrastructure needs. It's a very unique case where at the same time we're giving back to the community. We're repealing the special drainage tax, so that's unique to our system. And I think fortification of the town, building in resiliency, anticipating future change, and being proactive in preparing for what the years to come will bring is incumbent upon us as town staff and town council. So some of the categories, obviously these are eligible uses. We just talked about that in some detail in terms of general purpose, but certainly flood control. These are some annual estimates that, depending on the investment level we have, the funds we need, how we assessed where these improvements are needed, these are some categorical ranges that we could definitely spend money on. This is kind of new to this slide as town facilities. We have a need for a public works, even planning and building workspace. In order to be able to really do our job well, we see the need to improve customer relations and project delivery. The fire consolidation, we have the fire chief in the house, but the Central Marin Fire Department has recently consolidated, and they're also in need of space that Public Works is currently occupying. And then of course, it's really great for the community to understand that streets and potholes, safe routes to school, pavement maintenance are things that are critical to quality of life. Cheryl, I'm going to repeat your question because I have the microphone, but those are estimates of annual need. With Measure F, we could approach, I would say, a delivery of those numbers if it was to be approved. Yeah. So if we focus in on flood control, the next few slides, it is certainly a defining Corte Madera concern and issue. This is straight out of the staff report that I believe is at the back of the table, where we talk about, again, a third of our residents are in the 100-year floodplain. We have certain neighborhoods that are well known to be vulnerable, but I think this last point is the most interesting one to me, is that if Highway 101, say between Tamalpais Drive and Sir Francis Drake, is underwater, that impacts everybody getting to or from their home, right? Whether you live on Christmas Tree Hill or whether you live in Madera Gardens, you're going to need access to the transportation facilities. And so it really is a town-wide and actually region-wide issue. If we look at a couple of the next photos on the next two slides, they're from the El Nino of 1982, which I remember well. In my town, I could get into a boat up in Petaluma and canoe across the street to my neighbor's house. I thought it was pretty cool. I didn't come to Corte Madera at that time, but apparently it looked very similar here to what it did up in Sonoma County in 1982 after the El Nino years. But this kind of lists some of our storm drain system, canal, levee, length of infrastructure, our pump and gate stations, retention basins. These are all things that, again, they do not do well if we leave them alone. They require investment, they require improvement, and in order to fund those things, we need a stable long-term funding source. Another one of the great photos there, along with what it amounts to be a decade-old flood control study that had some recommendations where you can see the big dollar amounts. I fully believe that these numbers are a little underestimating what our current need is. So a quick calculation there, and you're looking at $40 million plus, and that's why we're looking again at that $40 to $50 million range when we adjust it for current need. The next couple slides just hone in on projects that we have underway, both in the transportation, pedestrian safety, bicycle safety realm, where I talk about phases. Some of you are familiar with this. We like to go through design where we draw out plans. We know exactly how things are going to be built. Many of these are in the design phase. A couple of them are moving towards construction, which is really exciting. And so those total around $6 million in ongoing transportation improvements. This is a picture I took a few weeks ago from up on Horse Hill, between Corte Madera and Mill Valley, and it really shows the one-way traffic flow on 101 northbound. And you know, the point of this is that transportation safety needs to improve. I've been really diving into our transportation record, where the collisions are taking place, who's getting hurt, how severely they're getting hurt. And I really want to use that information to help the council understand how we prioritize transportation investments. So again, going back to that safety concern that is the charge of Public Works, fire, and police, I think my department can do a better job of improving safety, and we have to do that while traffic congestion continues to get worse. So the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in 2010 had a baseline. They studied what happened between 2010 and 2016, and the Bay Area regional traffic grew 80%. So for those of you who understand math, 100% increase is 2 times as much. 80% is really close to twice as much. So if you think that traffic seems to have doubled in the last 5 or 10 years, you're right, it has. And that's because we've had a really booming economy and a lot of job growth and not a lot of housing growth. So that's why traffic has gotten much worse, and it's an issue that we can address in Corte Madera with some pretty innovative solutions. If we go over to the drainage and flood projects that are underway, here's some ones that are either in construction or final design. These are ones that have proven to be really helpful and valued by the community. If Measure F is renewed, we'll be able to do even more. These are just the ones that are underway. So when I say near term for this last transportation and flood slide, I'm talking by 2020, 2021 at the latest. These are projects that we'll have delivered on the ground. And if we combine both of those categories, transportation and flood control, we have $11 million in projects underway today. With Measure F and with some improved staffing and allocation of funds, that number of project delivery can go up to 15, 20 million by 2023, 2025, and the community would notice significant benefits in those capital investments. Just to kind of round up, is Measure F sales tax revenue the best long-term town capital improvement source? I think it is. I think for me personally and professionally, I would answer that this is a good source. I think it has the potential to generate the revenue we need between now and 2030 or now and 2040. I know for a fact that the state and federal revenue sources have been shrinking for a long time, both in pure allocation and in proportional allocation, as well as in inflation, lack of adjustment for inflation. And then again, Todd already mentioned how many other communities have been going for this particular sales tax source as a way to meet these locally controlled needs. I think the last slide I have is a little redundant, so I won't spend too much time on it. We talked about regional shoppers. This is a point we haven't made yet, but we do anticipate that revenue will erode over time. This is another one of the reasons why it's pretty smart to go to 3/4 cent, because brick and mortar sales are falling, not necessarily in Corte Madera. We've been pretty resilient here with our shopping centers in terms of average revenue over the years has held much steadier than it has in other parts of the state and other parts of the country. But eventually we'll start to see some of that. If you believe that autonomous vehicles are real, and I do, then personal ownership and purchase of vehicles will erode. That will also erode a revenue source for us because of the dealerships we have in town. That we have a potential to lose sales if people buy fewer cars, and instead they just order a car on their app, right? Somebody wants to go somewhere, they'll just hit their phone app, the car will come and pick them. It may not even have a steering wheel or a brake or an accelerator, and the car will come and pick you up and take you wherever you want to go for $10. It's going to be crazy. It's happening now. Inflation, if you believe in economics, then you know that inflation is real. And then, as a new member of the Corte Madera Public Works staff, really, for me, the infrastructure needs here are great. It's very expensive. So building levees, replacing retention basins, replacing pump stations, these are not small ticket items. And so if we have a complex and aging flood control system that needs replacement, and we have a transportation system that needs some repair and modernization, those are the millions of dollars. That's how we get into the millions of dollars of need. And Todd already talked about number 4, where we compared how we do. I guess we're number 1 in per capita revenue. So at least we're winning in something. And then at the 3/4 cent Measure F rate, the town really can't afford to sunset the flood tax in 2018 and give money back to residents and voters. So I hope I didn't go too fast, but I did kind of want to get through that and really open up the dialogue. So for me, a community forum is about what the community thinks. We already had a few questions and some discussion. So at this point, I would like to open it up to you all and get at your thoughts, concerns, compliments, questions. I'm going to go back to Cheryl, not to shirk the mayor, but she also rose her hand.
I just want to encourage the town to, you've categorized things as transportation and flood control. And I think that when you're looking at certain drainage problems, there may be opportunities to improve safe routes to schools, improve curbs, improve, infrastructure for transportation as well. So I hope that although you've presented it as separate categories, that there'll be a culture in the town staff that looks at opportunities in both lights.
Yes, I agree. They're not mutually exclusive. They're more divvied up for understanding, but certainly one of the things that's important to understand is that when we do transportation improvements and we impact a roadway, and Tamil Vista is a great example. We have some old water line infrastructure that's under Tamil Vista Boulevard. We've already begun looking into the fact that if we're going to do a roadway improvement along there, we're going to change some of the curb and gutter lines, improve the sidewalks, and add bike lanes. That is the time to really inspect the water lines, inspect the sewer lines, and improve drainage along the roadway. So I certainly don't have a philosophy of thinking them as different or exclusive. So yes, absolutely, agreed. The mayor did have her hand up, so I think it's incumbent to go to that now.
Thanks, Peter. No, I just wanted to thank all of you, number one, for coming, but also to thank so much our staff and my fellow council members and our tax oversight committee. You cannot believe the time that has been put into this. And although it might look like a little bit on a piece of paper, there's a lot of thought that has gone into this. We're all stakeholders in this particular measure. And it's very gratifying to know that we haven't had any opposition submitted on the ballot. So, as my mother would have said, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I hope that this is reflected when everybody goes to the polls, and certainly to spread the word for people that haven't been able to come, that this is a win-win for everyone, and they'll even see a reduction in their tax bill. So anyway, thank you to our staff and everyone here. Thanks, Peter.
You're welcome, Mayor Condon. Okay, I'm looking for other, maybe a new face, to me at least, a new comment.
I was wondering, how much is the town giving back when they give back the $98 tax? And also, how well do you expect Measure F to hold up if we have a recession, and like in 2008, how much did the city's sales tax revenue fall, if any, at that time?
Great. I think I know the answer to those questions, but luckily I have the finance director and the town manager here, but I'll take a first crack and I'll let them hook me. You remember that old show where you get hooked off the stage? So the first question is, how much does it impact individual property owners? What does it cost them to give back the drainage tax? What's the net change in revenue? For the whole town, got it. So we generate around $650,000 with the 640, 640, I'm being corrected by $10,000. It's a couple fractions of a percentage point difference, but an important correction nonetheless. So I round up, so in round numbers, $650,000 in annual revenue that comes in from the $98 per unit or per 1,000 square feet. Our estimate is that between 1 and 1.25 million in revenue would be generated by going from a half to a 3/4 cent. So the net change is around double. So we can double our revenue. I also calculated the net savings to the average resident. It's around $42 less per month if you vote for Measure F, and you plan on spending about $13 more per year because of the increased sales tax revenue or expenditure. And you'll save around $42 per resident with the repeal. So that's the individual change. It's a net positive change, both in terms of savings to residents and total revenue to the town. So it's a very unique measure. I've never really heard of a measure that has this ability to do that. And that's why Todd spent a lot of time talking about our per capita revenue. The main reason why those things are true is because many of the sales tax dollars that are spent in our town are not spent by Corte Madera residents. They're spent by regional shoppers and people buying automobiles in town that don't necessarily live in town. And then your second question was about, remind me? The recession, right. So I talked about up here that we actually expect this revenue to erode over the next 10 or 20 years. So if in the first year we go from 2.5 to 3.75 in increased revenue, we've already built into our estimations that those numbers will indeed come down. And I might let Todd chime in on the overall impact, but I do know that during the last recession, we lost around $500,000 a year in annual revenue because, well, two things. Salespeople weren't buying as much because people had lost their jobs. And then what happens is the county assessor's office goes in and assesses your property value downwardly, and you pay less property taxes. So what happened during the last recession is both of those two funding sources hit cities all around the state of California. We've built in that. We anticipate that this revenue will fluctuate up and down. And Todd and Daria spent a lot more time on the overall town finances and building into those things, but I think we anticipate it to happen, and I think we're prepared for it.
Jim, did you want to add anything to that before I say? Okay. So two things that we've done that are major hurdles for the economic downturn. So every 5 to 7 years, we have a major economic downturn. And what do cities and counties do? They freeze positions, and then you hope they come back someday. And what does that do for the community? You lose service. So our focus, the direction that the council gave me when I was hired 18 months ago, was to develop plans and strategies with our finance director, Daria, to speak to that. And so we know now through our analysis in the last 40 years of our town, the worst economic downturn was in the 2000s. It really devastated us. Our sales tax, we lost $2.5 million over a 5-year span. So that's our starting point. So we take the worst known event and then we say, how do we plan for the future? And so we've built a $500,000 placeholder. Our revenues, 18.3, our expenditures outgoing, a lot of it is our people, our staffing levels, is about 17.7 million annually. So you have a $500,000 cushion. Now that money gets spent, it moves around to various options throughout the year, but the point is in the bad economic downturn, we have that cushion so we don't have to freeze or eliminate positions. Our services today, when you look at what you pay for staffing, they'll be there in the good times and bad. And the second part of it was to maintain and improve services long-term through the economic downturns. And so those consolidations of Central Marin Fire Department and Central Marin Police Authority in 2013 and in 2017 are huge for our town. It literally took $750,000 savings to us annually. Annually. I mean, that's a real number, and it's a conservative one. And then what we did is we built into Phyllis's point of, well, what is this going to go to in the future? We took that $750,000 and we started to build plans to fund our unfunded liabilities over the next 20 plus years and develop our plan. So we just didn't take money from pots of money, our general fund, our reserves. We actually made our own future. We improved or maintained service, and at the same time, we have an answer and a solution to our unfunded liabilities. And so the point is, to your question, it's very valid. And so what I'll tell you is in the economic downturn, we have a plan to ensure that our staffing levels and our services maintain where they are today. And then now we have to develop our longer term plan because sales tax will be hit. We know that in a bad time, our 1%, the $6.5 million we bring in annually, it could drop to $6 million. And then we know the $2.5 million we bring in could also dip to about 2.1. So we know what those ranges are, and so now we can plan because we strategize. That's Daria's job. Okay, when is it coming? And we need a plan for that 3 years out. And so those are the things that your staff is working on, and I think we're headed in the right direction, and I hope you agree. So.
Yes, one thing when we were talking about the plan is we wanted a consistent revenue source for the capital projects so that if we go into a downturn, all the other towns will be cutting back. And if we have a steady funding source and a build-up reserve, then we can get construction at cheaper prices than if we wait until everybody else is rebuilding, everybody else's balance sheets and revenue streams have recovered, and so they're all competing with us for a limited number of contractors. So that's sort of in the background when we're thinking about the strategy.
Looking for other questions, comments? Vice Mayor first.
Thank you. Great presentation. I wanted to remind folks that have moved to our town in the last couple of decades who were not here for the '82 flood that it really did devastate our town. Folks might not remember what that was like, but look to what happened in San Anselmo in, what was that, 2005? We have the infrastructure in the ground, and that is what has protected this town. But that is what is requiring a whole lot of funding for improvements, replacements. You heard Peter talk about gates, pump stations. All of that equipment is very expensive. Our previous public works director, town engineer, who was the architect of our flood control infrastructure, once told me that the go-to place in the Bay Area during the big storms was always Corte Madera back in the day. These days it's Manzanita, because they can get good footage of flooded vehicles in the big pond, you know, that you see in the Manzanita park and ride. It used to be Corte Madera, and people need to remember that and take a good look at that 1982 photo. I'm assuming that's what you're putting up? Great. Okay, in kind of the upper left, let's get the photo back. You'll see Denny's. Oh, okay, in a second. By the way, that interchange, the Tamalpais Drive interchange, used to be a full clover leaf. So kind of in the upper left, that's Denny's. And upper right is the car dealerships. It's over off of Casa Buena. Okay, point the arrow to the upper left. Uh-oh. Okay, we're technically, okay, now everything's underwater. No, just kidding. Anyway, so I just wanted to add that there you go. So you see Denny's, and you can see that all the surface streets. It was devastating to Madera Gardens. There's another photo that you might see on the flood control, the flood mailer that goes to every resident in town every year that has a good shot of town center and Madera Gardens. But yeah, I mean, it was just really, really devastating. So, thank you.
Would you guys want to wrap it up and go home early? Should we? Okay.
You know, it would be very easy and kind of cheesy for a candidate who hasn't been on the council to say, well, I'm going to hold off and be coy, and I'm not going to support the present council, and I'm going to go against. But there are a number of reasons why I have overtly supported this Measure F, including that the work has been done really well. And the preparation, I think, is very thoughtful. And it's bold of you not to shirk the long responsibility that not all of which are obvious today. But there are two things that I want to pick up out of your presentation that I think are especially wise. One of them is the fact that a good portion of this is going to go to long infrastructure improvements which will have a long life. An entirely appropriate way to finance something that has a long physical life is a long source of income, because that's the most appropriate and least expensive way to finance those things. And the second that I particularly appreciate as a strong environmentalist is the acknowledgement that climate change and sea level rise is on the horizon, that it is a real thing that we've got to start preparing for now, both on the emergency side on our hillsides as well as on our sea level rise side. And I think that's entirely appropriate. And so I'm in favor of Measure F.
Okay, Mr. Kuhnhart, thank you for those comments. So it sounds to me like everyone's getting a pretty good understanding of what Measure F is. We got a sneak peek of the ballot language. That will be what comes out in the mailer from the county registrar's office. And all the voters registered will get a chance to review that. And from what I understand, I just learned this this week actually from Councilmember Ravazio, that more than half of Corte Madera voters will send their ballots in absentee. And so many of the ballots will be punched in long before the June 5th day that we go to the polls. So I don't have anything else. I don't know if Daria or Todd or you have anything else. Maybe just some final comments or.
I just want to thank you all. This is a complicated and it's a big picture item. Any feedback that you can give us, tonight's a step, but at any point you have your staff here. I'm just impressed with our staff, by the way. They're here on their own because they care. I didn't ask them to be here. This is a big deal for them and all of us, and so I thank them. We're going to link this presentation to the website. And then we have, again, our documents. The PowerPoint will be part of that. You'll have the ballot language, so as quickly as possible that we can get the ballot language out to our community, we're going to do that. And you also have a staff report from, I believe, the February 20th meeting. It's my favorite staff report. Peter was a big part of that. That's why I like it. And same with Daria. But it kind of tells a story in 5 pages or less of what we're trying to do. And so we'll also link that as well. But at any point when, and again, if people ask you about what we're trying to do in the community or you have questions, please come to staff. We're here for you. We serve you. Thank you for coming tonight. Have a good night, everyone.